Hi, this is Kevin Turner from Spanish River High School in Boca Raton, Florida, back with you for another AP Daily episode. Today we're talking about topic 1.3, the power of geographic data. What are we going to learn in this video? So geospatial data, we talked about it a little bit before. It's any kind of information that's going to be related to a particular point or a particular place on the physical surface of the earth. So we're collecting this data, and you're going to see that from 1.2, when you were with Ms. Nuroff, you looked at how geographers are using things like GPS. You look at your phone, you see it on your screen, and it's locational. You can use GIS. It's like a lasagna. And if you can tell by looking, I don't miss too many chances to eat lasagna. Satellite imagery, aerial photography, all kinds of remote sensing, distantiated perspectives of the earth. So geographers are collecting all of this data. And then what are they going to do with it? Right? How are they going to use it? How are you going to use it as a person? How are companies going to use it? Organizations? How can governments use this data? That's really the focus of what we're doing in this episode today. So decisions, right? We're faced with all of these problems that need to be solved, opportunities that need to be taken advantage of, challenges. And so we're going to look at economic, social, cultural, political, environmental things. You yourself, some of you are going to be young drivers pretty soon. And my daughter tells me, Dad, I don't need to know what all the road names are because I've got my GPS. Kind of scares me a little bit as a geographer. She needs to have a little more spatial awareness. But you could use a GPS app. It could give you turn-by-turn directions. That's a way that you could personally use some of this geospatial data to get you from point A to point B. If you were working for a company and that company wanted to analyze sites for future expansion, what if they wanted to maybe have a new hiring program, and they want to know, where are they looking for recruits? How are they getting interns from colleges? All of those kinds of things. Companies can use geospatial data to help them in that decision-making process. What if you were a government? Governments at all scales, local scale, regional scale, national scale, countries all over the world, they're acquiring data. And we talked about big data being acquired. Countries, companies, persons are collecting this data, and they're using it to help them make decisions. How can governments do this? Well, let's think about a local government, your city or a municipality, perhaps the county that you live in if you don't live in an urban area. City or municipal leaders might be collecting data and being interested in urban planning. There's a big thing nowadays, new urbanism, to create more walkable neighborhoods so that people are not always in the car. That has environmental impacts, that has social impacts. Clearly, it also has economic impacts. At a different scale, a state government might make decisions using things like satellite imagery to monitor sensitive environmental areas, wetlands. They might be thinking about different types of infrastructure improvements for highways or roadways, all right, the Florida Turnpike expanding. So at the national scale, you think about the federal government in the United States, evidence-based policy-making decisions, right? A big budget in the trillions of dollars. How's that money going to get allocated out to the 50 states? How's it going to get allocated out for programs that benefit children, like in education, or families, or the elderly? Right? All of these decisions don't take place in a vacuum. Right? They're being made with the benefit of geospatial data that's been collected by the census, by satellite imagery, by GIS programs, right, that are gathering data and creating those layers on maps so that they can be analyzed. So let's look at some ways that we might see some questions that are going to practice our ability with this topic and with these skills. Here's a map, a thematic map. It's chloropleth. We can tell that we've got shading or coloring that's going to show us the unemployment rate in Germany. And this is based on data that was from 2018. All right. And what they're going to show us here is that, if you go back in the history books, you may see this. Germany at one time was divided into an East Germany and a West Germany after World War II, reunified in the 90s. This is showing us the former East Germany along with the West Germany. That's a relic border there. You'll learn about that later in the year. But we can see that unemployment is at different levels throughout the country as a whole. And Germany calls their states, like we have states in the United States, they call them Länder. And so we can clearly see that there's a pattern emerging. Remember, we've been talking about patterns and processes. The northeastern part of the country has higher unemployment. As you work your way to the southern region of the country, you can see that that unemployment rate is decreasing. That is the richest part of Germany. It's a very industrial, developed part of Germany. A lot of workers are needed in those big corporations. So we see unemployment in the northeastern part. We see much less unemployment in the southern part. So how can the German government utilize, for example, census data to make some decisions here? Well, in Unit 2, when you start learning about population processes and patterns, you're going to see that, like many countries in Europe, Germany is not having all that many children. The average age of the country is increasing, right? Family sizes just aren't that big anymore. So if you have very low unemployment and not enough people to do the jobs that are being asked there in southern Germany, this is where the German government a long time ago said, how about let's open up guest worker programs? Let's allow migrants to come into the country, right? Migrants are always looking for economic opportunities. It's the number one reason why people in the world will move. But also those migrants know that the German educational system is robust and they want a better life for their own children. Migrants tend to be younger, right? So they're going to bring families with them. So what we're seeing here is that this question can be structured in a way that they might ask you questions about economic, social, cultural, political, and environmental processes that are happening along with this pattern that you're seeing. It's all about the power of that geospatial data. How and why questions are going to be a really important part of the AP exam for you. And what I want you to really understand is that as you go through the course, that basic idea of seeing patterns, observing patterns, and then being able to explain the how and the why of the processes that shape those patterns is going to continue to be the key to you being successful with this course and with the exam. So what should we take away? So we talked about big data a lot, right? Already in a few videos, you've heard me mention it. Big data is being used all the time, personally, by companies, by organizations, by nonprofit organizations, and by governments. It's vital to decision making because let's be honest, geography is everything and everything is geographical. So when you think about big data, just take a look at the image here for a second. And even if you pause and check it out and think about how much of this you can actually connect to on a personal level, right? Your own personal decisions, the decisions that maybe the companies that your parents work for, right, is going to be impacted by this. Where you live, the city, the state, and the country, right, all making these kinds of big data driven decisions. Thanks for watching. We'll see you the next time on AP Daily.
Welcome back. I'm Miss Newroth. Today we're going to be talking about spatial concepts. You've just been learning about the power of geographic data, and now we're going to look at some concepts like absolute and relative location, space, place, flows, distance decay, time-space compression, and patterns. Before we get into all of that, let's take a moment to talk about what spatial concepts actually are. Geographers, when talking about space, are not referring to outer space. They're actually really looking at simply the gap between two things. Not only that, but they're also looking at how phenomena are found in one place and how that might impact phenomena they find elsewhere. In other words, geography is about how all places are interconnected. You may remember in a previous video when I shared about these two geographers and how they were taking a look at the Arctic and seeing how faraway places may produce trash that through ocean currents make their way to the Arctic. This would be an example of studying how one place influences another place. One of the spatial concepts you'll hear a lot about throughout this course is absolute location. Absolute location is really very simple. It is the unique characteristics of a place that never change. Things like latitude and longitude. This would be related to that concept of site, which describes the physical characteristics of a place. If I were to describe the school I teach at, I would say it's located in a humid subtropical climate on very rocky soil. That would be the site of that place. Relative location, on the other hand, is all about how places are, where they are in relation to other places. This is important because it can tell us the significance of that place. If you take a look at the map there on the screen, you can see that we have the Mediterranean Sea. I've circled that little part called the Strait of Gibraltar. Now, this roughly 8-mile gap between Spain and Morocco is an incredibly strategic place. So the relative closeness or the relative location of Morocco to Spain creates this strategic point in the Mediterranean Sea for shipping. So that would be an example of the importance of relative location. When we talk about place, we really simply mean a unique location. And I like talking about the concept of place because humans have this very strong sense of place, or that would be feelings that are associated with distinct characteristics of a certain location. For instance, I have a photo here of Breckenridge, Colorado. I grew up very close to here and I have a lot of great memories from this place. There's something about the smell in the air, the sight of the mountains, and even the feel, the vibe of the community there that I really love. Maybe you can think of a place that you have a strong sense of place for. Maybe it's a friend's house or a place you traveled to on vacation. Try to get an idea in your mind of a place for you that has that strong sense of place. When we talk about flows, we're talking about how different places may interact by having people or information or goods travel between those two places. In this illustration, you can see that place A and place B have a lot of interaction between the two. This might be like the cities of Atlanta and Nashville. There are a lot of people that travel between the two. There are many flights a day that go back and forth between the two cities, and perhaps even a lot of phone calls between the two cities. Whereas some cities that are farther away, like place C, for example, may not have that same degree of interaction between the two places. You may have flows that are not equal. For instance, place C seems to give a lot more to place A than it gets from place A. Maybe place C is the center of a major media organization. So a lot of media or ideas or information flows from place C to place A. These are the kinds of things that geographers might study. The idea of distance decay is really very simple. The farther away something is from something else, the less interaction those two places will have with one another. Now, in today's world, distance decay has reduced. We have technology like airplanes or internet communication that allows us to interact with places that are far away much more easily. If you're struggling with this concept, you might think of a Wi-Fi signal like you see here. The farther you get away from a router, a wireless router, the less Wi-Fi signal you have until eventually you get so far away, you're no longer connected to that internet. That would be an example of the distance decay. Farther away from something, less interaction. Let's look at an example of distance decay. Here we have the country of Mexico and the country of Kazakhstan. I had the privilege of traveling to Kazakhstan a few years ago, and while there, I had a student ask me what my favorite food was. And I responded with a resounding tacos. This student, who spoke English fluently, looked at me with a confused look on her face. She had never heard of, seen, and certainly never eaten a taco before in her life. Now, if you think about it, Kazakhstan and Mexico are on opposite sides of the planet. So it would make sense that this student had less of an opportunity to experience Mexican food because there's simply less Mexican food restaurants in Kazakhstan. These two countries don't have as much interaction as the United States, where I live, and Mexico. I'm close to Mexico. So in my community, we have several Mexican restaurants. So this would be how the concept of distance decay plays out in the real world. That leads us to time-space compression. This concept is all about how interconnectedness and technology have reduced the time it takes to get a person, an idea, or a product from one place to another. It's all about our interconnectedness as a planet. I created this graphic because this is how it feels in my mind. It's almost as if our Earth has been squished or squeezed to become smaller. Now, in reality, it's the same size planet, but we feel closer together because of the technology we have available. For example, let's think about back in the 1850s. If someone wanted to journey from one side of the United States to the other, they likely would have to do that in a covered wagon. It was an arduous journey filled with a lot of obstacles. The technology they had at the time, the wagon, was not very sophisticated, and it could take them months and months to get across the United States. Fast forward to the modern day. I can hop in a plane, pop my headphones in, maybe take a nap, and 5 hours later, I'm on the other side of the country. This is due to this modern technology we have of a plane. So the East Coast may feel a lot closer to the West Coast of the United States simply because we have the technology to connect us to those two places so quickly. Geographers also talk about patterns. So here you see three basic different patterns. The first would be squares, the middle would be more lines or rectangles, and the third would actually demonstrate very little pattern. Geographers are constantly looking for patterns, patterns of homes or fields or even bus stops, to help us figure out what's going on in the world. And if we see a pattern repeating in many different places, we may be able to draw a conclusion about why that pattern keeps happening. Let's do some practice with everything that we've been talking about. I have a question for you here, and it relates to this concept of the why of where, something you've heard a whole lot about. So it says the why of where refers to A, geography's emphasis on landscape features, B, spatial patterns on the landscape, C, a definition of geography that is simply locational, D, the idea that the explanation of a spatial pattern is crucial, or E, the depiction of a region's physical features. Well, if you've been paying attention, and especially to this video today, you know that spatial patterns are crucial. So the answer here is D, the idea that the explanation of a spatial pattern is crucial. What should you take away from today? Geographers study how places are related to each other. They are interested in looking at how actions at one point on Earth can affect conditions elsewhere. In other words, all places are connected. As I always like to say, keep your eye out because geography is everywhere. In the next video, you'll be talking about human-environment interaction, so stick around.